The Prime Minister calls on the members of the Cabinet to hold a meeting to put mechanisms of the national programme announced by President Assad. And the President lays out a political solution for the crisis, formed out of 3 stages based on national sovereignty and independent decision. A wide appreciation of President al-Assad's initiative, and the citizens assert that it is a step forward towards the political solution. Prime Minister Dr. Wael Halaqi called for a meeting of the government to set up the necessary mechanisms of the national programme announced by President Bashar al-Assad in his speech yesterday to solve the crisis in Syria. Earlier, President Bashar al-Assad has delivered yesterday a speech at the Opera House in Damascus in which he addressed the latest developments in Syria and the region. The President asserted that the struggle is between our homeland and its enemies, between our people and the criminal terrorists. He said that these enemies are trying to terrorize our people who would never allow them to fragmentize Syria. The President added that the enemies of Syria are trying to force us to carry out their own agendas. They are utilizing few Syrians and many strangers and foreigners to destroy our country. This war we are fighting is in defense of our homeland, side by side with reform. The President said reform cannot progress without security reforms carried out by one hand while the other combats terrorism. We in Syria have never rejected political solutions. The President asserted that the political solution should be based in the first stage on regional and international commitments to stop financing and arming terrorists and to stop all terrorist acts in order to enable the displaced people to return home safely. After that, our armed forces would stop their operations and keep the right to retaliate when attacked. Second, there would be a mechanism of the commitment of everybody to the first item and to protect the borders. Third, the government would carry out direct and intensive contacts with all specters of the Syrian society. This would lead to a conference of national dialogue, including all the forces and parties wishing to find a solution in Syria, setting up a national charter, preserving Syria's unity and territorial integrity away from any foreign intervention and rejecting all types of terrorism and violence. The charter would be later on put into referendum. Third, an enlarged government would be formed containing all components of the Syrian community in order to carry out the items of the National Convention. Fourth, the constitution would go public to the public referendum. Once approved, the enlarged government would set up the laws agreed upon in the dialogue according to the new constitution. The new parliamentary elections would be carried out and a general conference of national reconciliation would be held, accompanied by a general amnesty to free those detained because of events, while civil rights would be protected for those who have those rights. The infrastructure would be rehabilitated and compensations would be paid to people harmed by the events. Our support of initiatives does not mean that we accept the foreign interpretation of such initiatives. President Assad said, Syria accepts advice, but it would never accept dictates. We accept assistance, but never hegemony. The people have helped the army in many ways against the terrorists. The President greeted the men of the Syrian Arab Army in their stand in the most violent wars. This army is determined to restore safety and security and to uproot terrorism. The President also greeted every citizen who carried out his national duty and stood by our armed forces. The President asserted, I am one of the people and will always remain one. Posts are temporary, but the homeland remains. The President asserted that Syria would never give up its principles or rights to those who wanted to weaken Syria. We assert that Syria would never forget its occupied Golan and other occupied territories. Syria would never give up the cause of Palestine, for which we gave great sacrifices. Any attempt to involve the Palestinians in Syrian events would fail before they begin. The Palestinians in Syria are carrying out their duty to their other homeland like any Syrian citizen. President Bashar al-Assad's speech left a good impression on the people of Aleppo. They say it is a precise description to the commitment in defending and loving the homeland. After the president's speech, hundreds of citizens in Aleppo toured the city's streets in mass rallies expressing their support to the political initiative that have been submitted by the president to get out of the crisis the homeland is going through, as they expressed their full support to the Syrian Arab Army in fighting terrorism. Also in Homs, hundreds of citizens gathered around the Syrian flag in a spontaneous rally expressing their support for President Assad's speech, as they see the president's speech was reassuring and drew away to Syria's victory. On the other hand, the opposition National Democratic Bloc welcomed the positive initiative President Assad's speech yesterday. The bloc expressed hope that all the national opposition forces inside and outside the country would respond to this initiative in order to reach a political solution. In a similar statement, the National Youth Party welcomed what he called positive points in the speech. The party called upon all the national Syrian forces inside and outside the country to respond to this goal and to work to translate it into a reality. Iran expressed its support for the initiative of President Assad to solve the crisis in Syria. The Iranian attitude was presented by Foreign Minister Ali Akbar Salehi, who pointed out that the basic items of this initiative focused on rejecting violence, terrorism and foreign intervention. These items would include drawing the political course of Syria's future on the basis of respecting political diversity and paving the ground to an administrative, comprehensive political process. Saleh also pointed out that the initiative draws upon the principles and objectives of the UN Charter and the common axes of all the regional and international initiatives presented so far. He called upon all the regional and international parties to exert all efforts to create an atmosphere for Syrian dialogue to preserve security. In Cairo, His Holiness Pope Theodorus II of Alexandria asserted that Syria remained a dear country to him, as he remembered Syrian-Egyptian unity, according to the Pope. The Pope expressed pain for events in Syria in a dialogue with him published in a weekly Egyptian magazine today. He asserted that the crisis was complicated to cause the intervention of many parties in it. The countries that wanted to help should have initiated a dialogue if they had been truthful. Senior researcher at the University of International Relations at the Russian Foreign Ministry, Yuri Zinin, said that the speech of President Assad was an important one that included an initiative to stop violence and a possibility to involve a wider range of Syrian people in running the country. The researcher said that the regional and international powers should primarily listen to this speech in order to put an end to the foreign interference in Syria's internal affairs, pointing out that if this interference continues, the number of casualties among innocent Syrians will increase, and it will be very hard to stop the violence. Zinin emphasized that the speech of President Assad addressed all the Syrians, especially the citizens, who are willing to make real democratic changes, as it constitutes a very important step for those who wish to save their country. Pope Benedict renewed his call to lay down arms in Syria and start a constructive dialogue between the Syrians themselves. He also warned that everyone will be a loser if violence continues. In his traditional speech on the New Year's Day before members of the diplomatic corps representing 179 states, the Pope mentioned the terrible suffering of the Syrians. In our local news, Minister of Health Saad al-Naif briefed the resident head of the International Committee of the Red Cross, Marian Gassar, on the attacks by the terrorists on the health sector in Syria. The attacks were represented by targeting the best cadres and facilities, including hospitals, health centers and ambulances, in addition to preventing the arrival of some medicine to those who need it. Minister of Health asserted that the ministry gave directives to the hospitals that have been paid money to exempt the citizens, especially the displaced, from paying the money in return of their treatment. The minister also called on members of the International Committee of the Red Cross to continue their field tours in field hospitals in different governorates to inspect the services provided there and to see the damage caused by the armed terrorist groups. The General Directorate of Archaeology, in collaboration with the International Scientific Committee, has launched a teaching course about protecting Syria's cultural legacy in times of armed conflicts. The course includes collecting data on the harmed cultural legacy and the start of exchanging technical information. The aim of the course is to raise the potential of Syrian teams to carry out the necessary measures of protection and reservation through assessing the damage in various archaeological and historical sites and moving relics to safer places. Hoping that these efforts will pay off, we thank you for watching and remind you that you can get more details on our website www.syriaonline.sy. After the break, Nariman will tell you about the latest governmental mechanism to distribute goods and the new agricultural measures.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Deputy Prime Minister for Economic Affairs, Minister of Domestic Trade and Consumer Protection, Dr. Qadri Jamil, asserted the need to develop mechanisms to control the distribution and to prevent smuggling basic goods, especially bread, gas and diesel. Mr. Jamil pointed out that the bread crisis has been reduced 70% and that the cooperation of all citizens with the government bodies, as well as the availability of basic materials and the well coordination, will contribute in solving the problems of distribution of some goods. Minister of Agriculture Subhi Abdullah said that the agricultural sector, in both its forms, plant and animal, constitutes the backbone of the national economy, especially the agriculture upon which many industries are developed, being the main ring of securing food for all citizens. Hence, everyone should protect and develop this sector. The minister asserted that Syria is still powerful and it is providing subsidies in different economic areas. During his meeting yesterday with a number of members in the directorates in the ministry, Minister Al-Abdullah underlined the need to develop an integrated plan to achieve sustainable agricultural protection and to promote correct ways of marketing. A draft stimulus package, which is expected to be issued this week, is declaring that the Japanese government is going to establish a lending mechanism with a rate that reaches $1.7 billion in order to encourage the companies to improve the new technologies and to cooperate in the new productive lines. Meanwhile, the draft showed that a 200 billion yen fund will be established with the Japanese International Cooperation Bank, supported by the state, in order to encourage the mergers and acquisition operations. Oil declined for a third day in London amid speculation that talks between Sudan and South Sudan may lead to the resumption of crude exports. Most European stocks retreated after the Stocks Europe 600 index reached its highest valuation in almost 3 years, offsetting gains by lenders as central bank governors diluted a proposed liquidity rule. U.S. index futures fluctuated while Asian shares fell. Gold swung between gains and losses in London after its worst run of weekly losses since 2004, as a stronger dollar curbed demand for the metal as an alternative investment. The euro declined toward a 3-week low against the dollar amid speculation that the European Central Bank will signal it's open to cutting its benchmark rate when policymakers meet this week. Ladies and gentlemen, this was our economic news for today. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.